IBM chose DOS, there were more and more applications that were written on DOS basis. Since there were more applications on DOS, other computer manufacturers like Olivetti, etc., they don't exist anymore, but they existed in those days, started to choose DOS. You get the snowball going. Is DOS the best operating system? No. But it got the right snowball going. That is how technically today a company like Microsoft can get 80–90% of market share. That is interesting. How can a new concept catch a market and take over a market? That are interesting concepts. Since at a certain point in time, if you would like to launch a concept, a new product, a new idea, how do you do that? The problem on financial markets, for having worked a lot with financial markets, is the dynamics of the market. You make a first move that you should counterbalance, that you don't counterbalance, and you get into a spiral which only becomes worse and worse. It's that same snowball effect, and at a certain point in time it explodes. It explodes faster. You might be trapped by your bank, that they say, oh, you stop, you exaggerate, or you might not be trapped like with this guy, and then it goes very rapidly and often exponential. If you ever have seen a snowball coming down, you know that in the beginning it goes very slow and suddenly it becomes very rapidly very big. It's an exponential process. The same is true with what happens in financial markets. A little fancy story. You might not know that book, that's okay. And then another present. It is called Flatland. It is more than 100 years old, and it literally talks about the flat world. It literally talks about the two-dimensional world. So imagine that you live in a two-dimensional world. In a two-dimensional world you have points, lines, squares, circles, ovals, rectangles, whatever, okay? You're living in Flatland and you meet a square. What do you see? A line. Okay? You see a circle. What do you see? The same line. You see a rectangle. The same line. You observe in Flatland, invariable of what there is, you either see a line or a point. A tree in Flatland would be a point. Okay? You have lines and points. No. You have circles, squares, or whatever, but you see lines. There's one smart guy which is called Adolfo Square, and he says, no, I am a square. And they all say, Adolfo, you're a fool. No, he says, I am a square. But Adolfo, look, you're a line. Yeah, I know, you see a line, but I am a square. They're both right. Adolfo is a square, and the people see a line. So they're both right, eh? So if you ever say he's wrong and I'm right, it's the most foolish remark you can make in your life. Be very careful, you might both be right. So don't say he's wrong. Try to avoid saying that. You can say, well, I don't really see how you see it. I see a line, but maybe you are a square after all, but I don't see it. That's a correct observation. Now, story continues. So, I'll shortcut the book. At a certain point in time, Adolfo goes for a walk in the forest. Going for a walk in the forest in Flatland means you have a line between the dots. That's what you have. And suddenly, Adolfo sees something very remarkable. He sees a point that becomes a line, that becomes a point again, and disappears. What did Adolfo see? A sphere. He sees a sphere that goes through the plane. It touches the plane, which makes a point. Small circle, bigger circle, smaller circle, smaller circle, smaller circle. Point, disappears. He's very happy since Square has seen the third dimension. He did not see the third dimension. He imagined the third dimension. He saw a point that became a line, that became a point and disappeared. That's what he saw. But since he goes beyond what he rationally understands, he says, this is the third dimension that I see. So he rushes back to his village. And he says to his friends, I have seen the third dimension. Oh yeah, they say, what did you see? Well, he says, I saw a point that became a line, that became a point and disappeared. Oh, and that's the third dimension? Yes, he says, since it's a sphere, a what? A sphere. What's a sphere? What's a sphere in 2 dimensions? How do you describe a sphere in 2 dimensions? You can't describe a sphere in 2 dimensions. So there is this poor Square that imagines the third dimension, is of course completely unable to those Flatlanders to explain what a sphere is. At the end of the story, they cut him in pieces, right? That's how the story finishes. If you would like to see the square, if you would like to observe the circle, what do you have to do? You have to go in the third dimension. And in the third dimension you can look down on the plane and you can see the circle or the square, right? You can never understand a paradigm staying within another paradigm. If you stay within a Cartesian paradigm, if you stay within a Newtonian paradigm, you will be unable to understand a complexity paradigm. If you think that the world is perfectly measurable, as with my Australian train example, it will appear to be completely measurable. So if you say, I don't see it, that's fine, but that's probably since you limit yourself to see it, that's all. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We often say that, but I don't see it, so it doesn't exist. No, it only says that you don't see it. Doesn't say that it doesn't exist. I recall the people see the line, but there still is a square. And it's not since they see the line that the square doesn't exist. Imagine that you walk through the desert and you look behind you and you see the path that you have walked. That path is crucially important since it brought you where you are. I'm only able to tell you what I'm telling you since I have experienced what I've experienced. If I would have experienced other things, I would tell you other things. So your experience, your learning is crucial for who you are. However, and there we make an error, if now you turn around in the desert and you look in front of you and nothing, the path behind you helps you to decide where to go. And that is what we often do wrong. We take the trend of the past and we extrapolate that in the future. That does not work. And that doesn't work since a system is complex. The only thing what it does is the path behind you is crucially important since you've learned from that. It gave you the capacity that you have today. It does not dictate you what the next step is. And that is very essential, and that touches to constructivism. There is no world out there. You construct the world. And as the quantum mechanics will tell us, the observer creates the observed. There is nothing that you objectively observe. However, I would like to make a very brief refresher, if you want to, about what epistemology is and what ontology is. And the reason why I insist a little bit is since what I'd like to give you in the complexity course is basically a new ontology, a quantum ontology if you want to. What is epistemology? Epistemology actually has to do with what you believe knowledge is, right? That's an epistemology. How do you think you should search for knowledge? What is research? How do you do research? How do you find reality, knowledge and truth? That is epistemology. An epistemology always takes place within an ontology. An ontology is the belief that you have on how the world functions. What should be true in order for your epistemology to hold? For instance, a classical Newtonian Cartesian ontology is one that is based on a rational, reductionist view of the world, which is interconnected via causality between a number of elements. That's an ontology. That is a belief. You don't know whether this is true. I'll give you one very strong example of